everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tracee Glab. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Flint Institute of Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our conversation with Neha Vedpathak at the opening of her exhibition, Time, Constant, Suspended, Collapsed, on view in our graphics gallery through January 9th, 2022. Before I introduce the artist, I have a few announcements to make. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, whose continued support enables the FIA to provide so many memorable exhibitions and educational programs. A big thank you to the citizens of Genesee County for the Genesee County Arts, Education, and Cultural Enrichment Millage, which provides free entry to the FIA every single day of the week, 7 days a week, for Genesee County citizens. I would also like to thank Huntington Bank, who sponsors our Huntington Free Saturdays, which is why everyone here in this audience was entered into the exhibition today for free. So thank you to Huntington Bank. Lastly, but not least, is our sponsor of this lecture, the Bray Charitable Trust. Thank you for sponsoring talks with artists such as this. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones, and we also kindly ask that you keep wearing your mask throughout the duration of this talk. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Neha. I'll give a little brief one because she's going to talk about herself in a much more eloquent way than I am, but just for those of you who are new to her, she began her career as a painter, creating minimalist abstract works on canvas. She subsequently sought to move beyond the two-dimensional plane. I'm glad that you did. After experimenting with different materials for a period of time in 2009, she came across handmade Japanese paper, which eventually became the focus of her artistic investigations. Having lived in multiple locations, including India, her place of birth, Chicago, Phoenix, and now Detroit, her practice is deeply inspired by her physical environment, and she often draws from the natural world. Her works have been shown at the ASU Art Museum, the Weatherspoon Museum, the Poetry Foundation, and the Detroit Institute of Arts, among other local and national institutions and galleries. So, without further ado, Neha, glad that you're here with us to talk about you and your work.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to the museum for having me and giving me the opportunity to show my work. Thank you to the audience for making it here. I think weekends are special time, so thank you for sharing it with us today. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So the number one question as a curator that I get probably about artists is that, how did they do that? And so I think the first thing we want to talk to you today about is the process you call plucking. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so like you see here, that's my signature process. I invented the technique in around 2008, 2009. There's a little bit of a genesis story to it. A friend of mine from Japan who I'd met in India gave me a stack of papers as a gift and say if you want to use them, do something with them. And I'm like, sure. And I used to live in India at this time. And so when I moved to the States, I grabbed this bunch of papers with me along with my other art supplies and lived in many different studios and many different places before I actually returned to the paper in any serious way. Like you mentioned in your introduction, I was a painter. I painted on the canvas. And around towards the end of 2007, early 2008, I was in this investigation period where I was trying to play with different materials and escape the formal way of painting. It had become unchallenging and uninteresting, and I just wanted to shake things up a little bit and try new ways of creating. And I used lots of different stuff from hardware store, fabric, metal mesh, some not so great material, which were ended up being very toxic. But and then I returned to these papers, and I'm like, okay, what can I do with this? And because I remember this very vividly, I was in my Chicago studio, and I was in this room. It was raining one afternoon, and I had a box of these tack, or I call pushpins. And I started separating the fibers of the paper using a tiny pushpin and just like seeing what I could do with this. And I made this small little object. It was a three-dimensional object, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. It looked intriguing. It looked not like paper, and immediately I knew it had ability to transform itself, but I didn't know what I could do with it. And so later that week, I showed it to a bunch of my art friends, and they thought, oh, it was interesting, but I'm not sure what you could really do with it because it's going to be a rather time-consuming process. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you're probably right, but I'm going to play with this a little bit more. And it's a much, much longer story, but to make a long story short, I decided that I wanted to spend more time investigating this material, and I think I was hooked. I mean, there was something very satisfying in doing this mundane, repetitive task. My work before that was very, very different. I would finish a large canvas, a 4x4, 4 feet by 4 feet canvas painting, one in a day. And I've always been a studio artist. I've always been a prolific artist. So the pace of making was very different than the pace of making in the plucking or the plucked paperworks. So that was, initially it was a challenge. It was a challenge for myself to see what can I really do with this technique, or can it really be a technique to begin with? Because going from a moment of inspiration to making it a formal, dependable, something that I can return to always, it took about 6 months to a year to kind of fully formalize that process. And there we are, I guess. I mean, that was a long answer, but I guess that's
it. No, that was perfect. So yes, we heard about the plucking process, and this is great. I personally, as a curator, love to visit artist studios, and if you ever get the opportunity to do that, you have to, because it's so much interesting to learn about their process. And this is a photo of her studio wall. So why don't you tell us what's going on here and what we're looking at?
I mean, it's just stuff that I draw, stuff that I collect, some of the older pieces of words. Oftentimes, if I'm reading or writing, if a line stands out or if it makes sense, I will scribble it on the wall or scribble it on the paper and stick it to the wall. And I don't know if you can read this, but somewhere in there it says, in art, all emotions are valid. In art, emotions make the meaning. And but besides that, these are some of my sketches. I think these, I would say, the material, the process, the environment, and of course the conceptual element of the work. These are four main aspects that I rely heavily, and which kind of make the pillars of my work. And I'm always trying to make sense of the work in a way, like, does it satisfy me in the I mean, of course the process is a big thing, and it does, but that's only one part of the equation. The conceptually, it has to make sense. It has to speak to me in the given time. It has to make meaning besides just being beautiful in the traditional sense. So those, I guess these are some of the things that, and I have that written on a piece of paper and stuck on my studio wall just as a reminder to.
In the lower left
if you can
of
see
the
it,
couch.
Left above the couch. So this is just a glimpse of a part of my studio process, working process.
So now I'll come back to what I jumped ahead to, which is take us back to your past and the images that and the environment that sort of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, when you Tracee sent me, by the way, this is the not surprise questions. If anybody thought they were, they're not. I knew the questions beforehand, and I've had the opportunity to think a little bit about them in preparation for this talk. And one of your early questions was, what were my influences or inspiration that led me on this path? And I was trying to think about it, and I grew up in India. I was born in India, and I lived in India till I was 24, before I moved to the United States. So when I was a child, we didn't have a lot of art museums. You know, I lived in Aurangabad. This is a place which is very close to Ajanta and Ellora caves. Those are the Ajanta caves and the Ellora caves. But we didn't go to traditional museums as we understand in the West here, but there was art and beauty everywhere. I mean, these were like less than 30 miles from my hometown. And as a family, we took weekend trips there. All friends and family that visited were always there. We were going to take them there. My mom had a very keen sense of the aesthetics, and she was always encouraging me and my sister to take music lessons, dancing lessons. She herself did ikebana and bonsai. So there was always this idea of having aesthetically pleasant environment. And as a child, I knew that pursuit of art was a worthy endeavor. And unlike, I would say, probably a lot of other Indian families, my mom did push me to go into the arts. And I mean, she thought I'd be an architect. That's a different story. but she did encourage me to spend time, and I think it was just understood that it was a value to spend time thinking about art, or artistic questions was not futile or was not superficial, and it was just as important as any other question in life. So I think I imbibed that early on, and so in retrospect, it's not as surprising that I'm an artist.
What a great foundation, and to have that support.
Only in retrospect. At the time, I was so bored. I remember walking here, I'm like, not again, not one more time. I've been here 50 times. So, but that's the nature of childhood and growth, I suppose.
I know when I look at those photos, I just think, wow, what an amazing place.
Yeah. And
that was so close to your home. You said 30 minutes away, right?
Yeah. Less than.
Wow. Amazing. So let's get back to the process and artistic creation. You brought images of your studio as well as works in progress. And so
I'm just going to go.
Yeah, go ahead. Go back one slide. So this is this one of the works in the show? On your table, and that's where you do you do everything horizontally on your plucking first.
Yes.
As well as color application, or do you add some of that when you're also on the walls?
All works. So this is just some of the images from my studio. This is me sewing pieces of fluff paper together, and this is, of course, me in the painting process, the work in the painting process. So yeah, all the works, they start out white. They're white sheets of Japanese handmade paper that are identical, and so everything is painted afterwards. And they're painted multiple times from the front and the back, depending on the work. They're sewed together a lot. I mean, I'm just going to go through some of the images. And this work is included in the exhibition. I thought this was kind of funny, because when Tracee told me the walls of the gallery were gray, and I was like, can we paint this white? I'm used to white walls, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, we have to keep them gray. I'm like, okay, fine. And then, but then I realized my bathroom walls were gray in my studio. So I used to take each work from the studio, from the actual working space into the studio bathroom and test it out. And I just think that was such a fun, hilarious, non-traditional process.
It was a coincidence, right? We didn't know that your bathroom was almost the exact gray of our galleries.
And now I do think I might want to experiment a little bit and try to make work specifically designed for different colored walls. So I'm thinking about it. So thank you for that.
That's great.
And so these are some more images about just different pieces of paper painted. So this is another process shot. This is the work Particle and Wave, title Particle and Wave in the exhibition. I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's a coffee cup in here. This is one of the sketches for this work, title Loop 1.
These are all just various stages of that same work that we just saw, or this work here, that work. And before we go into more about process and your inspiration, I also wanted to say a few words about how the exhibition came here to Flint. So I met you. You were on a tour with some other group, and you mentioned you were an artist, and it was a lovely introduction. But then not too long after that, we had a guest conservator here. He was conserving our tapestries, named Howard Sutcliffe, and he says, "You really ought to check out this artist's work in the Simone de Sosa Gallery in Detroit. And I just bought a piece of hers, and she's really great." And I didn't even know it was talking about you. And so I ended up going there, and it was just a coincidence. But again, it was sort of meant to be. And then we have this gallery dedicated to works on paper. And normally we show prints and photographs and watercolors and things like that. But I pitched to my director and said, this is a work on paper. And I really think her works would be amazing there. And at the time, I just thought we would show works that you had shown elsewhere, and that would be that. But then you proposed of doing all new works, and then the pandemic hit. and gave you your theme, right? I mean, that whole idea of what happened during the time in the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we met coincidentally, and then it came to the show, and it just evolved from there. I think that was 2019. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we were supposed to do the show before the pandemic.
Right, it was postponed.
And it got postponed, and then I was thinking about the work and the show when, the whole world was in the process of shutting down and restarting and shutting down and all of that. And also the side note, I was soon after I found out I was pregnant. And so I'm really processing time in this, like, a dual way, I guess that's a common thread, the title of the show, Time, Constant, Suspended, and Collapsed. I think all of us have felt that in some way in the last year and a half. I guess it happens even in the non-pandemic time, but because of such a compressed nature of time. And it felt like, I don't know, 200 years have passed, and at the same time, it was just 2 days ago. Right. And to me, because my body was changing so much internally, I was having doctor's appointments every month and every week, as time progressed. So I was tracking time quite directly. And yet, I had this visceral experience of not understanding what is happening. Should I keep working? Should I stop working? Should I panic? I cannot panic because I'm pregnant. And there was a lot of, and it's of course not just me, the whole world was experiencing some degree of this in a different way. But to me, it felt like a bodily experience. And of course, like everything else, I try to process my world, my immediate world, and the larger world around me through my work. And when we were talking about possibility of postponing the work, postponing the show, and I'm like, yeah, that's great, because I can really dig into this concept a little bit more, and And I mean, this as an artist, like people think of artists as I don't know what they think of, but we tend to have a lot of different interests, and one of my other interests is just like an armchair interest is astrophysics. Nice. And so, and I see a lot of videos and try to understand, and don't ask me to explain any of it, but I understand in a way that keeps me engaging and it makes me want to read and learn more about it. And the idea of time collapsing comes from there. Right. And the subatomic particle becomes a wave and a particle at the same time. So I know I've lost. But that doesn't matter. But what I was saying is that the uncertainty of things is what it's talking about. And the uncertainty of the subatomic particle was very much equal to the uncertainty of our lives at that point. And that's where a part of my brain was, but the body and the brain were trying to make sense of the whole thing.
Right. Well, I think that's a really poetic way of putting it, and the work that's on the screen. I remember you telling me in the studio that line became that entered your work and had not been there before like that. So
I think I try to make. I mean, obviously, I'm an abstract artist. That's my main language of doing work. But I leaned quite a bit on the line. This body of work. I felt like I had to use it in a way to actually direct. Like I was thinking more like diagrams and parallel walls and linear equations and stuff like that. And I was trying to also think about the long time, not the human scale. Right. Part of me was like, in the life of the planet, it doesn't make a difference. We're just a little couple years of craziness. But in our lifetime, it's obviously it's going to be a marker in our story. Right. So I mean, that was just some of the things going through my mind while I was thinking about these works.
Well, I for one am glad that you process that and put it into works that we can see, because that's the gift of artists, that they can process these complex ideas and emotions and make them into something stunning. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that honestly is a joy, and one of the most important aspects of being an artist is able to do it, like spend time doing and processing and thinking and making works that have some tangible connection to the world, but they're also deeply personal and intimate. So I mean, it's a two-way channel, I think.
So what? I think we have some more images of your studio.
So this is my studio in Detroit on the east side. I bought the studio building around 5 years ago, and when I moved to Detroit, and it did not have a door, or it had a roof, so that was great. But it didn't have a door, and it was an active crack house. And this is one of the images when everything was cleaned out, but there was mountains of poop and all sorts of nasty stuff in there, and human beings. And so we got all that cleaned, and this was one of the process of trying to get the studio together. It was a big 3.5-year project, and obviously this is my studio now. And I just think, having that physical connection and transforming a place physically also was very informative in my experience as being a Detroit artist.
So if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about scale. That the idea of you think a lot about the size of the work. This is sort of deceiving on the screen, but if you look at the inches, it's 120 inches. That's 10 feet across. So quite a large work. Can you tell us a little bit about how you choose, or whether something chooses to be big or not?
I think the work kind of defines the work. This working tells me, if that's the language I can use, what size it needs to be. if I'm making a site-specific work, of course, the dimensions of the space inform the work itself. But I like working in all different sizes and at different scale, I would say. I mean, I like really smaller work, which is intimate and gets me a chance to get really into the granular level of the work, like different fibers. You can see the different fibers and the different layers in there, and the scale of the work. I think the scale goes back a little bit to the beginning of my work. When I just started out, a lot of people didn't trust the process or didn't believe I could make large works or make not necessarily large, but substantial works. And a part of me was to show what I can do, and part of it was to also learn what I can do. I mean, I didn't know I could do that, so I had to find out for myself. And in doing that, in doing those early works, I kind of really started to enjoy working on these large scale works, and it takes me about 6+ months to make this one work. Because so the way I work in the studio is the plucking is a big part of the process, and then there's sewing, sketching, conceptualizing, and painting. So these are the 5 different elements of the work, and the actual plucking process is, is very personal, very intimate. And I know your question is coming up, so I'm gonna just jump ahead.
No, go ahead. Yes.
To it directly. Yep. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a meditative process, and I've been thinking about that a little bit. So usually, even the monks, who meditate for like 20 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, if you're at the a black belt of meditation. But I mean, I work when on my plucking days, which are like about 3 days a week, I would say, on my plucking days, and I'm plucking for about 8 or 9 hours a day. And so that is where the real rigor and the capacity and the focus and of my cross of meditation and obsession comes into play. And it's where, I mean, that's the foundation. I think it's where really the magic happens. And the painting and the conceptualizing and all of that are other bits which are necessary elements. But the foundation is obviously the plucking process.
Very cool. And what I mean, and you're sort of alluding to this a little bit when you were talking about meditative, and we talked earlier too about this, that what is the most important part of art making for you? You talked a little bit about that individual nature that you have. It's yourself and no one else kind of thing.
I just think the most important part is to be able to make work and to be able to spend time. I mean, the fact that I'm most grateful is that this is my profession, so it's like any other job that you spend 8-10 hours a day working. So I don't want to say I have the luxury, because it's kind of a luxury, but it's not a luxury, it's my work. But besides the semantics of it, I do feel I'm really grateful and happy that I get to do what I love, and being able to bring another way of looking and processing into the world for myself, of course, but also for the larger audience. Because I feel like as human beings, we're all trying to figure out and all trying to live and are all trying to feel and explore and care about each other, and there are different ways of doing it. And I think art or making art is just a valuable aspect of being human and being an artist. So.
Thank you. And I think that there was maybe one more slide of your previous works. Yeah.
This is the show that you came to see.
Yep. I remember that.
Yeah. So talking about scale.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Baba. This was at the Poetry Foundation in Chicago.
And we had talked about bringing in a large work to our space, but our ceiling wasn't high enough. So sometimes it's the push and pull of museum work is.
And then this work. We talked a little bit about the environment, but this work again is a larger work, and this is based on Detroit. When I first moved to Detroit, it was the first 3.5 years I focused on Detroit as the subject of my exploration and subject of my study, and different aspects of understanding the city and what it meant to be a new resident in Detroit, and then not so new resident, and then working with the building and all different facets of that. So I mean, this is one of the work that I would say is strongly rooted in the place and the environment where I am. And then this is a little bit of a left turn, but this work, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona for 2.5 years. So this was a desert outside Phoenix, about 2.5 hours. And my husband and I took lots and lots of trips here and different parts of the desert. And that became inspirational. So I was still plucking and making pluck paper works at this time, but I also try to absorb the actual environment into making this, which is a stone made by me. I collected different sands and pigments from the desert and made the stone using only the sunlight and the gum and all the natural materials. And the other iteration of this and environmental kind of work was this work, which was shown in Chicago, and where the long garland that you see hanging is like a pluck paper garland.
Wow.
And all the walls were painted from the soil and the pigment that I collected from the desert. And it had a sound element, and viewers and audiences could walk in this box, which was made in the gallery space. And so it's just another way that the environment strongly affects me and my work. And I think having lived and moved in multiple different places, for better or worse, I tend to absorb my surroundings and they tend to become part of my work. And then I think we had this one last pluck paper detail.
And it was interesting to me because seeing these slides from this angle, when you showed the desert and it looked like plucking to me, that kind of waves and the sand. So it's very interesting how your work looks very environmental. I mean, in terms of the landscape, that kind of rolling undulations. Very interesting. Of course, the colors too are very. I can see those coming through as well. Very interesting. I think I only have like one question left, and then we're going to open up to see if anyone in the audience has questions. And that's what's next. What's your what are you looking forward to in the future?
I'm honestly trying to think. I don't know.
It's always a fun question to ask someone, right?
One question, I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to think about it later.
Sure.
I mean, I have some ideas. I want to explore the linear, the line more into my work. I really enjoyed using the line in my work directly, and it made, my previous works tend to be a little bit more serious, and I thought that was a way to take a little bit of heaviness, not the physical obviously, but the emotional and the psychological heaviness from the work, and it made things a little bit lighter for me. At least I felt that. So I'm going to use, I'm hoping to use the word, the line a little bit more. I'm also playing with scale again, and I have a couple small three-dimensional boards in the studio that I'm working on right now. So
And you have a show coming up or opening next week in Chicago, right? Or you're in a group show there.
yeah, it's a national Indo-American museum. It's the first of its kind in the U.S. and it's this inaugural show that's opening up next week.
Oh, that's exciting. Congratulations. So do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask any? I see a hand back there.
Perhaps I missed this in your introduction, but as I understand, these friends gave you this pile of papers and Greg decided to make it into something. I'm very curious about a description of what is paper like. Is it thick paper? Is it thin paper? Is it loose paper? How do you go through this process to take it?
Did everyone hear the question, or should I repeat it? It was referring to the beginning where she mentioned that her friends gave her a stack of paper, and then you wanted to know the quality of the paper. Is it thick? What is the paper like?
So it's a super thick, fibrous Japanese handmade paper. It's quite dense, and the fibers of the paper are very strong, and hence it allows me to tackle the paper and and do things to it that it do. Is that okay?
Yes, that's
Okay, thank you.
And we unusual for our gallery there, and I do see your hand. I'm going to get to you right in a second, but I just want to mention this, that we put up stanchions in front of our work because nothing's under glass, and you really want to touch it. So because it has that amazing look to it, and so we were just being proactive and hoping that no one actually touches it. But yes, you have a question back there.
Can the artist use your microphone?
Oh, sure. Craig, will it cause any interference? You might have to turn yours off so it doesn't get any weird feedback. Any other questions? Back there? Yep.
I'm personally in the third artistic features, and I remember I was supposed to have an exhibition last year actually, until I was cancelled due to COVID, and that was just I did an artist block, but seeing you present this exhibition that you did, I asked you how you got that for
Are you asking me how to get out of the artist block?
basically.
Yeah. So that's actually a very good question, and I mean, unless you're an artist, it doesn't matter to you. But I do want to say that work makes work. So it doesn't matter what you make, you just have to make. And we didn't touch upon it in our conversation so far, but that's the other big part of who I am as an artist is the discipline of making work. I've been working e- um, ever since my art school every single day, almost every single day, uh, mostly like 8 to 10 hours a day, as much as possible. I mean, this last year is different because of I was I've had a baby, but other than that, and even now, I feel like having the discipline of making work and getting in the studio, and I actually keep office hours, and I have for as long as I remember, and I just wake up, get my coffee, and go to the studio. And it doesn't matter how productive that day ends up being, is just being in the studio and keep doing it. And even some days you cannot produce anything, and that's okay, but I still go to the studio and read a book if that's what it is. But I want to be there. I want to be available when an idea comes to capture it, because if you don't, somebody else is going to take it. So I just feel like you have to be present in your studio, present working, present writing, present thinking as much as possible, with or without the show, with or without a deadline. And that's the only way. I mean, I know how to make work. I'm sure there are other artists who do work differently, and that's great. But personally, for me, the ethic of being in the studio and committing to this time with my work has been the most useful. I don't know. I hope it helps you, you know. Thank you.
I'm still curious about the paper. What other uses do they use this paper for? What's it supposed to be used for, but you took it to another level?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, I mean, like Japan has a history of paper and paper making. So, and a lot of them, I think she gave me a bunch of paper, and some of them were printed paper, and some of was it gumpy paper and very thin paper. So it wasn't just this paper. It was lots of different kinds of paper. And because the paper making in Japan is an art in itself, so that itself was kind of like a gift. She didn't really think that I would go ahead and use this as a major material in my work. But I guess it's used for, I don't know, crafting. I don't know what people do with it, to be honest.
So you had a piece that's 20 feet wide. Does it come like that, or do you have to piece?
No, they all come individually. I mean, some of them can be bought in rolls, but the way I use my paper, they are about 22 by 28 inches sheets of paper, and I sew it all together. And like I said earlier, that sewing also takes time, and plucking takes time, and painting takes time, and thinking and conceptualizing takes time. And I was talking to Tracee earlier, like I don't work with assistants, or I don't have anybody else helping me out in the studio, so I do it all by myself. And to me, that much personal touch, quite literally, with the paper and with the work is what keeps it exciting and challenging and interesting for me.
Any other questions back there?
Do you ever give tours of the studio to groups?
I mean, I have in the past, and I think I'm going to do a studio tour next year to a group visiting from San Francisco, but not regularly, because I don't know, I'm making work.
Any other questions? Anybody? Oh, one back there.
So can you tell me about how you get the different, I see like all kinds of layers of colors. There's like the yellow in the background and the white in the front. Is it like how many times do you go over it? And how do you get those different colors in those different dimensions?
So this particular image that you see, there are, I want to say two layers of paper sewn onto each other. So it depends. I mean, I can go 2, I can go 3 in terms of layering of the paper. But I have also, I want to go back, and so this work, it's painted from the front and back. The lower part of it, the green, different shades of green that you see, and then the works in our show here. So if you look at this is painted linearly on from the front, and then it's painted. By the time you come to this, I think there are like 6 layers of paint in it from the front and the back. So it just depends on the individual work. Like this work is painted probably like 3 or 4 times, and there's also, I mean, this is not a finished piece. The one in the actual galleries is a finished piece, and there's white paper sewn on top of each other. So it's just depends on the. So this was painted multiple times. I think there's like 6 layers in this. So, depends.
And back there?
I have 2 questions. One is,
so multicultural, coming from India and the United States. How do your ideas evolve or come in a way? Because you're talking to such a different audience in relation to the word. And it's one thing that's a little different from this. I know about this our experience. And this whole concept of butter is so very, I shouldn't use the word different, but it's in many ways in the Eastern culture, it is, but it's a continent, it's very different. How has that affected you?
Um, so I'll take the first question first. I mean, the honest answer is I make work or I respond to ideas, and what comes out of me is what comes out of me. I'm not really trying to target an audience or speak to A or B audience. I'm just a person like everybody else. Of course, my background being from India has given me a different reference point to what I do, and also probably a different layer of how I respond to stuff, whether it's stuff in the news or books or songs or politics or whatever it is. And um, and I mean, I guess it comes down to who I am as an artist and what my background and childhood has been. I've been fortunate that I grew up in a family that supported me. Like I said, the idea of doing art or art having even going beyond making art, the idea that art had spiritual quality, that was way of finding something more than the earthly things, all that came from my childhood. And I very much still hold it close to my heart. The concept of meditation, like I was thinking about it, and I mean, I was introduced to it probably even before I was 5 years old. And it has always been part of my uh, life. And it's not to say that those two are directly linked. I mean, again, I used to not like talking about meditation directly in my work, because I felt like that's such a personal and intimate way. Uh, but now I'm talking about it and more in the sense of trying to explain how it feels like, the way time passes, you have a very focused and controlled stance, and that goes on for many many hours of the day. So I mean, to answer your question, Latika, I feel like it's hard to tell how do I make work or who do I make work for. It's more like who I am and what is my way of engaging with the world, and hence my work comes from there. um, and then the other part about being a mother, um, I don't know, I mean, it's new, it's exciting, it's a lot. And her babysitter canceled yesterday and all of that. So I mean, it's real, but I was working since my baby was like 7 weeks old, after she was born, and I was working throughout. And to me, again, it's my profession, but it's also something that makes me who I am. It makes, I mean, I need to to do my work in order to be a better person, a better mother, and hopefully, all of it makes sense eventually. And it's kind of hard to parse out, because being an artist is more than a profession. It's not just a profession, but at the same time, I don't want to make it sound too otherworldly. We I want to keep my feet on the ground and call it what it is. I mean, it's a job, but it's the rewards of the job are way more than any other job can give me. So I guess that's a not an accurate answer, but somewhat of an answer for you.
We have time for one more.
Do you find that when you're working on a piece, you're able to easily encounter like a definable moment of completion for it? I mean, with the level of detail that goes into your work, it seems like you could potentially just continue.
Keep going on and on and on.
Ever difficult, or do you have a definable moment where you say, "This is it. This is done"?
I do.
All right, enough's enough.
I do. I mean, of course, there's a little bit of a negotiation towards the end of the piece, and sometimes it is what you thought perfectly what it is going to be, and sometimes it's not. But I do feel like that a moment that, okay, this is enough. If any more, you're going to mess it up, and you think, okay, I cannot do anything more to make it better. Or I think I do know the moment. It's hard to verbalize and hard to put it in words that what is it, because sometimes it begins with a sketch, and sometimes the sketch goes out of the window fairly quickly, and then I just follow my instinct. But yes, there is a moment for me personally that I'm like, okay, this is done, and I think it's where it's a combination where I think I have done my best or given my most, and trying not to ruin it. So yeah. Oh, sorry. Wait, I couldn't say thank you. Okay. I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here and being part of the conversation, and thank you for all your questions.
And thanks for that final question, because it was a perfect way to say we're done. We're out of time, but the exhibition's open. If you haven't seen it or you want to check it out after hearing all of what you learned, just go out from the theater, turn right. There's the gallery that takes you right down to the graphics gallery. You can't miss it. So again, thank you for coming today, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you.